I ended things when I realized I was dating his before photo. He loved telling people I saved him and how much better his life got after me. Then I found his private account where he joked that I was just part of his rebrand. He loves telling the story of his life in two parts. There was before, then there was me. He does it at dinners, at parties, in front of strangers at bars. Someone will make some harmless comment about how put together he seems, how focused, how on track, and he lights up like they just fed him his favorite line. He says his life used to be a complete mess, but that everything changed. Once I got serious. And then he always does the same thing. He glances at me, smiles, and gestures in my direction. Sometimes it is subtle, just a tilt of his head like I am a piece of supporting evidence. Other times it is blatant, a hand on my shoulder, a little squeeze, a mock bow like he is presenting a prize. People laugh, say it is sweet, call us goals. They tell me I am good for him. They say I must have the patience of a saint. They joke about how I fixed him. He never corrects them. When we first started dating, I thought it was flattering. There is a strange kind of comfort in believing you rescued someone from themselves, that you are the line between before and after. It makes every sacrifice, every compromise, feel like it belongs in some larger narrative. You are not just dating. You are building a redemption arc. But over time, the story started to sound less like gratitude and more like marketing. The first time I felt it, really felt it, was at his friend's birthday dinner. Someone had passed around old photos on their phone of everyone in college. There was a lot of mock horror, everyone groaning over bad haircuts and questionable fashion choices. One of his friends swiped to a picture and burst out laughing. They shoved the phone toward me and told me to look at my boyfriend before the renovation. He grabbed the phone before it reached my hand. He did it with a laugh, but it was too quick, too sharp. He said he could not have his ruined beta version out in circulation. Everyone laughed again. I laughed too because I did not know what else to do. Later that night, when we were alone, I asked what they were talking about. He said it was nothing, just that he used to be different. Different how? I asked. He shrugged and said, worse. Then he kissed me and said it did not matter. Because that version of him was dead. I remember the way he said dead, lightly, like he was talking about a bad app update that got rolled back. The jokes kept coming after that, just in different forms. His sister would say I finally got him to dress like a functioning adult. His coworkers would tell me they did not recognize him anymore and meant it as praise. Someone once raised a glass and said this is to the woman who finally got him to grow up. He smiled at that one. He did not say that he was the one who had signed up for the gym, changed his hair, switched his job, filtered his life into carefully curated habits. He did not mention that all of those things had started months before he met me. Instead, he let them credit me. He let them believe I was the turning point. When I mentioned it to him one night, he laughed it off. He said I was overthinking. He said he liked that people saw him as better now, that they saw us as proof that people could change. He told me I should take the compliment. There was something about that line that hooked in my mind and lodged there. Take the compliment. It replayed in my head every time someone treated me like his sponsor, his handler, his warranty. I started listening more carefully when he told his before and after story. He never said I helped him heal. He never said I made him feel safer, or kinder, or more honest. The words he used were sharper, efficient. Clean, he said productive. He said optimized. When he talked about his past, it was not with sadness or even embarrassment. It was with this detached disdain, the way someone talks about a failed product launch. He said things like that version of me tanked. He called his old self a cautionary tale. He described entire years of his life as bad prototypes. I would watch his face while he talked. He was animated and rehearsed, like this was a pitch he had given many times. I realized that in his head, his life was not a timeline, it was a rebrand. And I was part of the new packaging. The realization was small at first, more like an itch than a wound. It showed up when he corrected the way I told stories about us, nudging my words into cleaner lines. It showed up when he asked me not to tag him in certain pictures because they did not fit the look he was going for. It showed up when he nudged my hand away from his hair, not because he did not want to be touched, but because it would ruin the effort. The compliment that never sat right became a chorus. You saved me. You made me better. You would not have liked old me anyway. Each time he said it, it sounded less like love and more like a warning I did not yet understand. One evening, I was looking for a sweater in his closet. He had asked me to grab something warm before we went out, and I knew he kept an old box of winter stuff on the top shelf. I dragged a chair over, climbed up, and reached blindly into the dark space above the hanging clothes. My fingers brushed cardboard instead of fabric. There was a box pushed all the way to the back, taped once and then again, like someone had decided it needed to stay closed. I could have left it there. It was not what I had been looking for, but something in me had already been tugging at loose threads for weeks, and this felt like another one. I pulled it down, the cardboard rough against my palms, and set it on the bed. The tape came up easily, like it had been on too long to really want to hold. Inside, there was no winter clothing. There were neat stacks of photos, rubber banded in groups, the edges worn from handling. The top one was of him, except it was not the him I knew. It was heavier, softer, unpolished in a way that made my stomach twist. He was standing beside someone I did not recognize, his arm around them, both of them caught mid-laugh. Their faces looked real in a way his never did now. I realized with a slow, cold certainty that I was holding a version of him I was never supposed to meet. I sat down on the edge of his bed with the box between my knees and tried to line this stranger up with the man I knew. In the photos, he did not look broken or lost. He looked alive. There he was at some house party, cheeks flushed, shirt wrinkled, holding a red cup and laughing so hard his eyes were almost closed. Someone had drawn a crooked mustache on his face with marker. He did not seem to care. Another stack showed him at the beach. Not the filtered, early morning jog shots he posts now, but sunburned, hair wild, shoulders rounded from slouching into conversations. There was a picture of him running toward the water, head thrown back, like whoever held the camera had shouted his name and he had turned at the last second. In almost every photo, he was touching someone, leaning on a friend, arm slung across someone's shoulders, cheek pressed against someone's temple. Not posed, not curated, just messy proximity, like he had not yet learned to keep himself framed. I went through them slowly, rubber bands snapping one by one. The more I saw, the more disoriented I felt. This was supposed to be his before, the wreckage I had supposedly rescued him from. But there was no sign of the wreck, no hollow eyes, no emptiness. He looked heavier. Yes, softer, less controlled. But he also looked present. The door opened behind me and I nearly dropped the whole box. He stepped in, stopped when he saw what I was holding, and went very still. He asked me where I had found that. His voice sounded calm, but his jaw had tensed. I told him about the closet, the box, how I had thought it was winter clothes. I tried to sound light, apologetic. I said I did not know he had so many old photos. He came over and started gathering them like I had scattered something dangerous. He said those were from a long time ago. He said he did not like looking at them. I pointed to one where he was sitting cross-legged on a living room floor, surrounded by friends, some kind of board game half played between them. His head was thrown back, mid-laugh, one hand over his chest like he could not breathe. I told him he looked happy there. He barely glanced at it. He said that whole era was fake. He said he had been pretending. I asked what he meant. It was a simple question, but it came out sounding like I was interrogating him. He said those were his unpolished years. His exact word, unpolished. Like a surface that had not yet been sanded down enough to shine properly. He started putting the photos back in the box faster now. He said he had no idea why he even kept them, that they were just reminders of a version of himself that had no direction. He laughed a little and said if I had seen him then, I would have run in the opposite direction. I watched his hands work, stacking and straightening. The guy in the photos had ink-stained fingers, chipped mugs in his sink, a thrift store couch collapsing under a crowd of limbs. The man in front of me had manicured nails and a carefully chosen watch that matched his minimalist bedroom. He had a perfectly folded sweater on the back of his chair, waiting for him to put it on. He closed the box and hugged it to his chest, like he could hide its shape that way. He told me he liked his life better now. He said it felt real now. He said what he had before was chaos masquerading as joy. I did not argue. I just nodded, though something in me recoiled from his phrasing. Chaos masquerading as joy, fake, unpolished. All the words he used were the words people use in branding meetings, not in therapy. When he put the box back in the closet, he pushed it even farther toward the back. Then he tugged my sweater off the chair and handed it to me, telling me we would be late. As we walked to the restaurant, I kept thinking about that laughing version of him on the floor surrounded by friends. My mind did not want to accept the idea that what I had seen was fake. If anything felt forced, it was the way he smiled now. Always calibrated to a certain angle when a camera appeared. The way he spoke about himself like a product that had finally found its market. Over the next few weeks, little things started to connect in a way I did not want them to. When he told stories about his past, he skipped over entire years, compressing them into a single line about how lost he used to be. When someone mentioned a specific trip or memory, he brushed it aside, said it had been a low point, said he did not like to think about it. If they pushed, he changed the subject. I began to see it for what it was, not a confession but a rewrite. He had carved his life into a before and after so sharply that everything good in the before had to be recast as counterfeit. Otherwise, his current version, the one everyone praised me for fixing, would not look like such an upgrade. It started to make sense why people kept thanking me for things I had not done. I had not dragged him out of bed at dawn to make him go to the gym. He had already been doing that when we met. I had not persuaded him to leave a dead-end job. That resignation email had been drafted before our first date. I was not the reason he bought new clothes, changed his diet, switched his hair, but he never corrected anyone when they assumed I was the catalyst. He let them believe I had rearranged his life. It made him look transformed and made me look essential. It was a neat story, even if it was not true. What unsettled me was realizing he had told that story so often that he seemed to believe it. He spoke about his old self with the kind of contempt people reserve for failed campaigns. That old version had not just been unhappy, it had been wrong, off-brand, unusable. One night, we were out with a group of friends, the same orbit of people who had known him long before I arrived. The conversation drifted toward social media, old posts, nostalgia. Someone joked about how they had done a full wipe of their high school photos. Another bragged about deleting their old handle and starting fresh. Our mutual friend sitting across from me grinned and said he was still amazed my boyfriend had managed to pull off his whole transformation. He said he sometimes went back to look at the journey, because it was wild seeing the contrast. I asked what he meant, half interested, half already tired of hearing the same comments. He laughed and said he was talking about the account, obviously. Then he mentioned a username I had never heard in my life. I told myself I would ask him about it later. The username our friend mentioned slipped into my mind like a splinter. I laughed when everyone else laughed. Pretended I understood the reference, but inside something tilted. It was not his current handle, not the polished, public one I followed, the one full of white space and neutral outfits and captions about discipline. This one sounded smaller, less official, like an inside joke I had not been invited to. On the way home, I asked him casually if he had ever had another account. He said everyone had old accounts, that most people grew out of them. I asked what had happened to his. He said he had wiped it a long time ago, that it was just full of junk from his messy phase. He said it like a period at the end of a sentence, closed topic. That night, he fell asleep easily, the way he always did after social events, as if people drained him completely. I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing even out, feeling the tiny glow of my phone screen reflected in the ceiling. The username looped in my head, letter by letter, until I could not stand it anymore. I slid out of bed and went to the living room. The apartment was dark except for the blue light of the router and the faint city glow seeping around the curtains. I sat on the couch, opened the app, and typed the username into the search bar. It came up immediately. The profile picture was of him, but not one I had seen before. He was half turned away from the camera, wearing an oversized hoodie and squinting into sunlight. The bio was short, just a phrase about rebuilding and a lock icon beside the word private. I stared at the little button that said follow. It felt ridiculous that my thumb shook before pressing it, like I was crossing a line. I reminded myself we were together. We lived together. There should not be a secret door I was not allowed to knock on. I sent the request. I did not expect him to approve it quickly, not in the middle of the night. I told myself that if he asked about it, I would shrug and say I was curious that our friend had mentioned it. I almost put my phone down. The notification came less than a minute later. He had accepted my request. I froze, listening. No movement from the bedroom, no change in his breathing. It was like some part of his brain had been on autopilot, tapping approve as soon as it lit up. The same way he dismissed emails in his sleep, the grid unlocked. At first, it looked like any other transformation account. Before and after shots, gym mirror selfies, side-by-side collages, bloated face versus sharp jawline, slouched shoulders versus rigid posture. Captions about discipline, about cutting out dead weight, about choosing the life you deserve. It was the vocabulary he always used, just rawer, less smoothed. The oldest posts were from around the time our relationship started. I recognized the dates. I recognized the shirt he was wearing in one before photo. It was the same one he had worn on our third date. Back when he still made little wardrobe mistakes, he had drawn a line down the center of the image, labeled one side old code and the other side update pending. I scrolled down further, past protein shake bottles and shoe close-ups and screenshots of step counts. Then I saw myself. It was not my face. It was my silhouette. A photo of us from behind. Taken in a shop window reflection. My hand was in his, my hair was pulled up in a careless knot, and I was wearing an ugly coat I loved because it had deep pockets. He had cropped the image so our heads were cut off, focusing on the outline more than the detail. The caption said, part of the glow-up package. Below that, smaller. Almost like an afterthought, training wheels. My chest tightened. I clicked into the comments hoping I had misunderstood. One friend had written, do not get too comfy. Another had joked about free trials. Someone else said every rebrand needed a test audience. He had replied with laughing emojis and a line about how sometimes you needed a stabilizer while you learned to ride properly. He had not written my name, but he had not needed to. I remembered that day. I remembered thinking we looked sweet in the glass, like a couple in a movie. I went back to the grid. There were more posts I had never seen. A photo of my hand next to his on a table. His fingers longer, mine smudged with ink from a pen. The caption read partnership as a productivity hack. Another shot of our matching sneakers, except he had tagged the brand and written about the importance of surrounding yourself with symbols of your future self. Each time I appeared, it was like that. Not as a person, but as a feature, a proof point. The comments followed the same pattern as his friends at dinner, just harsher without my presence. They called me the stabilizing influence, the accountability buddy, the soft launch. One of them asked how long until he leveled up again. Another said he was finally out of his before era and should not backslide. He had answered that one too. He had written, not planning to, this is just phase 2. Just phase 2. My eyes burned, but I kept scrolling. I told myself I needed context, that there had to be something. Some post where he talked about me like more than a metaphor. I wanted to believe there was at least one caption where he thanked me by name, one picture where I was not just a symbol of progress. The grid kept loading, the further I went. The more recent the posts became, the clothes were the ones he wore now. The apartment in the background was ours. I recognized the rug, the lamp, the corner of the couch I was currently sitting on. I scrolled faster, watching dates blur past. Then I saw a timestamp from just a few weeks ago. The post from a few weeks ago was a mirror selfie in our hallway. He was in his usual uniform now. Fitted shirt, clean lines, the watch he liked to straighten when he was thinking. In the foreground, blurred at the edge of the frame, was my shoulder as I walked past. Keys in hand. I had not even known he had taken the picture. The caption read, surrounding yourself with stability while you rebuild is not weakness, it is strategy. In the comments, someone asked if that meant he was still in phase 2. He had replied, almost there. Some small, hopeful part of me had been clinging to the idea that this account was a relic, a graveyard of old thoughts he had outgrown. Seeing that date snapped that last piece of denial in half. This was not a past mindset. This was current, active. He was still narrating me as a concept rather than a person. The hurt I had been trying so hard to swallow did something strange then. It thinned out, stretched, and cooled. It stopped feeling like a bruise and started feeling like a verdict. I sat there for a long time, phone in my hand, watching the glow of the screen fade in and out as the app timed out and woke up again. At some point, I closed it. At some point, I went back to bed. He rolled toward me in his sleep, arm heavy across my waist, the same way he always did when he was half conscious. For years, that weight had felt like safety. It felt like a claim now. In the morning, he padded into the kitchen in his soft joggers, hair mussed, still warm from sleep. He moved easily familiar, reaching for the coffee grinder, the mugs. Our mugs. Mine chipped at the rim, his immaculate. The domestic choreography we had perfected over time. I watched him for a minute, just watched him exist in the space we had built together, and tried to reconcile that man with the one who wrote about me like a piece of equipment. He noticed my silence before I spoke. He asked if I was all right. I told him I had trouble sleeping and that I had ended up on my phone. I said our friend had mentioned his old username, so I had looked it up. He froze for a fraction of a second, then resumed pouring water as if nothing had shifted. He said, lightly, that there was not much on there. He passed me my mug. I told him I had seen it, the captions, the comments. The way he described me, he did not deny it. That was the first surprise. I had braced for deflection, for jokes, for him to say I was reading too much into it. Instead, he set his own mug down and leaned back against the counter, considering. He asked what, exactly, had upset me. The words he chose were careful. Not what was wrong. Not how could you think that. As if there were acceptable and unacceptable reactions to what I had read. I said I was not a training wheel. My voice came out quieter than I expected, but steady. I reminded him of that caption, that phrase, part of the glow-up package. Temporary, he exhaled slowly, Like this was a conversation he had rehearsed with himself and hoped he would never need. He said he understood why those words might sting, but that they were not meant to diminish me. He said they were just a way of explaining his process to people who had known him before. His process, he said when we met, he was in the middle of dismantling a life that was not working. He said he knew he needed structure, routine, and someone steady beside him while he figured himself out. He said I had given him that. Warmth and predictability and something to come home to that did not collapse like his past habits had. He said this like he was offering me a compliment. I asked if he had ever seen me as something other than a stabilizer, an environment for his improvement. I asked if he had ever thought of himself as being there for my growth too, or if that had never fit into the brand. He frowned, genuinely confused. He said, of course he had been good for me too. He listed the ways as if he were reciting bullet points. I was less anxious now. I dressed better now. I made better choices now. He said we had elevated each other. I asked why then. His private narrative TVD, the one he shared with his closest friends Tim Verdun, only ever framed me as the thing that helped him become the person he was always meant to be. He did not argue with that wording. He repeated it. He said yes, that was exactly it, that I had helped him become who he had always meant to be. He said it with such certainty, such strange pride, that I realized this was not a slip, not a cruel joke he had gone along with. This was the story he genuinely told himself. There had been an old him, defective and bloated with bad habits. Then there had been a strategic phase where he found the right supplements, the right job, the right exercise routine, and the right girlfriend. Now there was this version, honed and polished. The hero of his own case study, and I was a chapter, not a character. Something settled in me as he talked. Not peace. Not yet. But a clarity so sharp it felt like it could slice every shared object in our apartment in half. I told him I could not unknow this. That I could not go back to pretending every time someone praised me for fixing him. I was not just hearing an echo of his own narrative. I told him I had finally understood that he had rewritten his past to make himself look more transformed and made me the hinge in the middle. His expression shifted then, not to guilt, but to frustration that I did not seem to grasp what he saw as obvious. He said he did not understand why this had to be a catastrophe, why it mattered if the beginning was strategic, as long as now he loved me. He stepped closer, reaching for my hand, and asked, almost baffled, why me helping him become the person he was always meant to be had to mean the end of us. I did not answer him right away. His hand was still reaching for mine, hanging there between us like a question. I looked at it, at the careful way he held himself, at the way his jaw clenched like he was bracing for a negotiation. Not a loss. I told him I finally understood why the compliment had never sat right. He frowned. I took a breath and said it anyway. I told him I did not want to be someone's training wheels. I did not want to be a stabilizing influence, a strategy, a phase. I did not want to exist in anyone's story as the before picture that makes their after look better. He opened his mouth to protest, but I kept going, because I knew if I stopped I would soften. I said I was happy he was proud of who he had become. I said I was glad he had crawled out of whatever dark place he believed he had been in. But I told him that when I looked at those photos in the box, I did not see a broken man. I saw someone whose life had been messy and real, not defective. And when I read his captions about me, I did not see love. I saw a before and after ad. Something in his expression hardened then. He said I was twisting things. He said I was ignoring everything we had built together. The routines, the shared account, the apartment, the trips, the inside jokes, the way his friends finally took him seriously now, the way his family spoke about him with respect. He said I was being ungrateful. The word landed between us like a dropped glass. He said I had benefited from this too, from his new discipline and focus. That he had created a life where I did not have to worry about certain things anymore. That my anxiety had gone down, that I had grown more confident alongside him. He spoke about it like a joint investment, and I was trying to pull out early without acknowledging the profit. I asked him if he heard himself. He shrugged, impatient. He said relationships were supposed to make you better. That was the point. You meet someone, you improve each other, you refine your lives. Why was it so terrible that he had framed that improvement in a language that made sense to him? Because, I said, in your language, I am not a person. I am a feature. He looked genuinely wounded then. He said that was not true, that he loved me, that he could list 100 things about me that had nothing to do with strategy. And he did start listing them rapidly, like he could out-talk the evidence. He loved the way I curled my toes under when I was thinking. He loved the way I organized the spices by mood instead of cuisine. He loved the way I laughed when I was too tired, the way I refused to watch the middle of a movie without seeing the beginning. He loved the way I slept, the way I wrote, the way I always read signs out loud. The list was long and specific. It should have soothed me, but none of it changed the fact that in his private archive, the place where people keep their most unfiltered selves, I was a phase, a mechanism, a bridge between his broken narrative and the sleek version he wanted to live in. I told him love without respect for my personhood was not love I could live with. He stared at me like I had just thrown away something precious. He said people did far worse in relationships and still stayed. He said I was choosing to be offended instead of choosing to work through it. He said he could archive the account if I wanted, delete the captions, reword things. He offered to edit his own history to make it easier for me to stay. That was when I knew I had to go, because he still thought the solution was to rewrite the story, not change the behavior. He was not horrified that he had spoken about me that way. He was horrified that I had seen it. I told him I did not want the edited version. I did not want a new caption. I did not want to become a better piece of copy in his narrative. I wanted out of the frame. I packed quietly. It did not take long. So much of our life together was his. His furniture, his gadgets, his carefully chosen decor. My things were small: books, clothes, a chipped mug, a plant that had never quite decided whether to live or die. As I zipped my bag, he kept talking, cycling through stages. Confusion, persuasion, anger, something that looked almost like panic. He asked if I was really going to throw everything away over some words on a screen. I told him the words had just revealed what was already true. At the door, he said I was making a mistake, that I would regret giving up someone who was willing to grow. I did not say what I was thinking, that I was not leaving because he grew, but because he only knew how to grow through people, not with them. I left, the first night in my new place, a small sublet with crooked floors and two bright walls. I lay on a mattress on the floor and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the building. Pipes, footsteps, a distant television. My phone buzzed a few times with messages I did not open. Eventually, the notifications changed. He had posted. Against my better judgment, I opened the app and went to the account that had started all of this. The grid had a fresh square. It was a photo taken in a gym mirror, but closer than usual, the details sharper. His jaw looked tighter. His eyes were serious, almost stern. The caption was short. Next chapter. There were comments already, friends cheering him on, asking what the new phase would be, telling him they were proud of him for staying true to the process. They spoke about him like he was a product line they had watched evolve. For the first time since this whole thing began, I did not feel a rush of hurt when I saw it. I felt relief, because in that glossy, well-lit image, where everything was framing his transformation and inviting praise for his progress, there was something missing. No blurred shoulder, no stray reflection, no second pair of shoes at the edge of the frame. For the first time in his story, I was not there at all.